So hello, everyone. I'm Nina Collins. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Revel. Revel is a social platform and events platform for women over 40, the social platform for women over 40, I like to say. And this is our regular weekly live webinar podcast recording for our podcast, Raging Gracefully. So it'll be a webinar. We have participants in the audience. They can write in the chat. They're also welcome. Participants are welcome to raise their hands and speak as long as they don't mind their voices being recorded, because this will go out as a podcast recording on Friday. And our super special guest today is Mona Eltahway. Mona is a very well-known feminist writer, Muslim feminist writer. You're Egyptian. She lives in New York and Canada, and I guess also in Cairo. You'll have to tell me about that.
We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it all. She's written 2 books. One is called Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. And the second book is called The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, which I own and bought. It came out just in the last year or so. You're kind of famously, you were, I don't know, abused, injured during Mubarak's, during the revolution in, was that, I'm not sure what year that was, November, the 18-day revolution.
In 2011. Yeah.
In 2011. Oh, Newsweek magazine has called Mona, named her one of 150 fearless women of 2012. Columbia Journalism Review named you one of 20 women in media to watch. And the Missouri School of Journalism awarded you a honorary medal for distinguished service. So it's just really a thrill. And you write about rage, which is a subject near and dear to my heart. I don't know if you know, but I once wrote an article for Elle about my own history with rage. So welcome. And I thought we generally do these conversations for about 30 to 40 minutes. I could probably talk to you for hours. Mm-hmm. What I would love to know to start with is kind of your story a little bit, because you're so unusual, right? Mm-hmm. A fierce Muslim feminist is not all that common. So welcome, and you can just start talking and I'm going to listen and ask questions.
Sure. Well, you know, one of the things that I did in my first book was to show that fierce Muslim women are quite common. So when you read Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, you know, I go through the history of several feminist movements in the region that is called the Middle East, or sometimes called Southwest Asia and North Africa, just to show that there's an indigenous feminist movement, you know, in Egypt and other parts of that region. But my own personal story also kind of encompasses that too, because I was born in Egypt in 1967 to Egyptian parents, like you said. And then when I was 7, my parents both got scholarships to study for their PhD in medicine, because my parents are now retired, but my parents are both physicians. So they moved our family to London when I was 7 and my brother was 3. And we also now have a sister who came later. So we lived in the UK for about 8 years. And then we moved to Saudi Arabia, where I lived for 6 years. And then I moved back to Egypt to study to become a journalist. And during my years in news reporting, I worked for a variety of media, including Reuters news agency, with which I moved to Jerusalem, where I also reported. And then I eventually moved to the US in 2000. And when soon after I moved to the US, I became an opinion writer and stopped news reporting. But one of the things that I do is I identify as a feminist. I don't identify as a Muslim feminist, because it's really important for me that I ground my feminism in secularism, and I ground my feminism in a universality that basically directs its rage, seeing as we're going to talk about rage, against the patriarchy. Because and I make that distinction because there is a school of feminism called Islamic feminism, just as there is Jewish feminism and Christian feminism. That is not my feminism. I am just a feminist. Nice. I'm of Muslim background. I was born in Egypt, but I'm just a feminist.
That's great. I love that. I should also say for our participants that you have an incredible newsletter. And I also want to talk a little bit about your business model, because I'm really interested in that. So that's a really important thing that you said, that you were a secular feminist and you don't identify as, I love that. 2 things also I wanted to not forget. I was in Egypt this year. I went to Egypt.
I saw your pictures on Instagram.
Yeah, and I'd never been, and it was amazing and so beautiful, and the people are so beautiful. And also your hair and your lipstick are so great. I just had to say that also. And you change your hair color frequently, right?
I do. I mean, one of the things that I did during, you know, when the pandemic first started, I used to have bright red curly hair that was down to my shoulders. And then I buzzed it all off, Nina. I just shaved the whole thing off. And I kept, well, So like the long and short of it is, after I was assaulted in 2011, in November of 2011, by Egyptian riot police, they broke both my arms and they sexually assaulted me. And I was detained for 12 hours by the police and the military. And soon after I was released, and I needed surgery and both my arms were in casts.
But wait, let me back up for a sec. So you moved to New York in 2000. So you were around 30. We're pretty much the same age. I was born in 1969. So then what took you back to Egypt? Why were you there in 2011?
So for the revolution. I mean, I was living in New York, but the revolution was something that I had dreamed of all my life, as so many Egyptians had, because I knew we deserved to be free. And when the 18 days happened, I was in New York City, but I went back to Egypt twice later in the year. I couldn't go back during those 18 days. And one of the times that I went back was for a pivotal protest. And that's when the riot police broke my arms and sexually assaulted me. And I was detained for 12 hours. Now, when both my arms were in casts, I promised myself that when my bones were healed, that I would dye my hair bright red, because it says, now I want to tell everyone that I'm a big fan of profanity. So there's going to be a lot of fucks. So when both my arms were in casts, I promised myself that I would give myself a gift for surviving. Bright red hair said, fuck you, you didn't kill me, I survived. And tattoos on both my arms as, again, a gift for surviving.
Wow.
But when the pandemic began, this bright red hair that was my fuck you, I survived, like was no longer serving me, because we were now, those of us lucky enough to be working from home. It wasn't about being outside and signaling with my red hair, I survived. Now the signal to survive is stay at home, because many people can't stay at home. And so I shaved off my hair as a signal to say, the way to survive now is to stay at home if you can, so that as a community, we can help those who are vulnerable and those who can't stay at home. So I shaved off my hair as that signal.
Nice. Well, it looks absolutely stunning. And it must be a lot to maintain, though. You must have to bleach it and then color it. But anyway, we'll talk about more important things. So let's talk about feminism in general. How do you run your business? You're an academic, you're a journalist. What's your daily life like?
Sorry, I had my alarm on, so I would not forget to press on the Zoom, and it keeps going off.
That's
So,
fine.
like I said, I stopped news reporting a long time ago, and I switched to opinion writing when I moved to the US. And I became an opinion writer in about 2001, 2002. And for the greater part of my opinion writing, I wrote as a freelancer for the Washington Post and the New York Times. They're the two newspapers in the US that have published most of my opinion writing. And just before the pandemic, I was a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and the Washington Post. But the kind of opinion writing that they wanted from me was about the Middle East, was about Egypt, was about Islam, and I wanted to write about feminism in general. And I found one of my biggest frustrations in the United States is that it's mostly white women who are given the platform to write about feminism in general. The rest of us, Black women, women of color, women who are not white, are basically told, okay, you write about your box, because feminism with a big F is for white women. And you have to talk about Egypt, you have to talk about Islam, you have to talk about being Black, but not about feminism with a big F.
So
And
it goes back to this idea of being kind of ghettoized as an Islamic feminist.
Exactly. And I wanted to claim feminism with a big F. And so, and the pandemic, coincided with my ability to do that, because I do a lot of public speaking, and we couldn't travel when up until now, I can't travel the way I used to. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So at first I launched a Patreon, which I still have. And I asked people, I said to them, look, those of you who have been following my writing, the kind of writing that I do, and I want to expand it. And as an anarchist, I want to be able to provide the kind of work that I do for people who can't pay to subscribe to the New York Times or whatever. So those of you who have funds, please help me. And they did. And then I thought, okay, what am I going to do now that I have a base of funds? I thought, let's do a newsletter. And again, I insisted that the newsletter be free, because I believe that feminist knowledge is a resource we must share. So I said, I'm going to keep this newsletter free, but those of you who can pay, please pay, because it helps to keep it free. And they have been. And that's how I've been supporting, thanks to my readers, this anarchist feminist has been able to live off those two models.
That's really amazing. So Patreon and people really supporting you. The newsletter is called Feminist Giant, by the way, for everyone who wants to subscribe. So do you have, I've read that you have women working for you. You have journalists who you're also paying, which is pretty amazing.
I do. I mean, it's a small setup right now, but, you know, with big ambitions, it will be expanding. But it's only been around for a year and a half. And so what happened is, very soon after I launched, a professor of feminist and gender studies asked me if I would take some of his students as interns because they couldn't do an internship physically because of the pandemic. So I thought, wow, what perfect timing. So I took on 5 interns who I trained to curate feminist news of feminist resistance from around the world.
Yep.
And that became the global roundup. And then when they finished their semester, 2 of them said, you know, if you'd like more, you know, we would love to stay on. And so I took them on as paid interns. I couldn't pay them when they were interns while they were studying, because in Canada, universities don't pay their interns. This wasn't something I chose. But once they finished their course and they became interns for me now, I paid them. And so thanks to my patrons and those who choose a paid subscription to Feminist Giant, I was able to pay 2 interns. Now,
that's amazing. That is really, and they're all women, I assume?
Yes, these are women of color. They're very young. I think they're probably 20 and 21. And now it's down to 1 because one of them is in graduate school and she's very busy being a TA. So the one who remains is now a contributor, and she curates twice a week. And I will be getting 2 new interns from the study program very soon.
That is great. When we get to travel again and you come to Brooklyn, I want to get you to do something at the Brooklyn Public Library where I'm on the board. I think that would be amazing.
I would love to.
When you say you're an anarchist, what does that mean?
It means that I believe in the dismantling of all forms of hierarchy. So as a feminist, I believe in the destruction of patriarchy. And patriarchy for me is a system of oppressions that privileges male dominance, but it's not just about men, because there are some women who benefit from patriarchy. And I believe the way that patriarchy maintains its power is through hierarchies. And those hierarchies are, we're all familiar with them, you know, white supremacy, capitalism, ableism, homophobia that's used against queer people. I also identify as queer, transphobia, ageism, ableism. These are all, you know, militarism, the incarceration, the prison industrial system. These are all forms of hierarchies.
It's a lot. It's a lot to dismantle.
I'm a busy woman, Nina.
Yeah. So wait, I have so many questions already. So when you say you're queer, does that mean you're with men and women, or does it just mean you're identifying to be open?
Yes, so I'm with men and women. I'm attracted to, and I have sex with men and women. And also my partner, my beloved, I call him, with whom I've spent much of the pandemic here in Montreal, I'm polyamorous. And so we have an open relationship. He's bisexual and I'm queer. So we have what I believe is a revolutionary relationship, which is part of what my anarchism means. You know, as an anarchist, I also don't believe in monogamy.
Right. You want to take apart all of these structures that we've come to kind of take for granted. I hosted an event here last night, a Revel event. It was a vision board workshop, and there were 10 women in my apartment, and 2 or 3 of the 10 were really advocating polyamory. Like, it definitely is a revolutionary thing that is becoming mainstream. It's fascinating.
It really is. And I'm so delighted that more and more people are talking about it, that it's being featured in more and more so-called mainstream media. It's a really exciting time to see all of this come out, you know?
Yeah. And what about financial structures? Like, do you consider yourself a communist, a socialist? What is your belief about the future of money and workforce and all that kind of stuff?
Right. Well, as an anarchist, I belong firmly on the left. So, you know, there are some anarchists who identify as communist and some who identify as socialist. But the reason that I use the word anarchist is to distinguish myself from any political ideology that believes in a hierarchy, whether it's to be led by workers or it's to be led by farmers. And so, you know, I hold on, but I'm definitely firmly, radically on the left. So I'm anti-capitalist, and I'm also a firm believer in universal basic income, which addresses your question about work. I believe that everyone should be given a basic income, and if they choose then to work to make more money than that basic income, then, you know, go ahead and work. But I believe that everyone must get a basic income, and I think the pandemic has made that especially urgent.
Yes, absolutely. So universal basic income, universal healthcare, universal education.
Yes.
How do you feel living in the States compared to
it's a big challenge. Well, compared to Canada, so Canada, there are more open discussions about UBI, as universal basic income is called, because they're far ahead of the US when it comes to healthcare, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
Utilized medicine, all of that. And there is an account I follow on Twitter called UBI Works that basically makes its existence. It's to encourage politicians who are running for office to include UBI on their platform. So I think that, when we begin to emerge from this pandemic and we see, the immense, not just challenges, but the horror that it subjected so many people to, threats of eviction, the great resignation, as we call it, more and more people leaving work because they recognize that they are being squeezed dry, by the injustices. When we hear that billionaires got richer during the pandemic and the poor got poorer, this now it's the perfect time for the United States to start talking about UBI, to start talking about a more just way of being, because what came before the pandemic must never be something we go back to.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, except I think it's the opposite is likely to happen. It feels like Biden is not doing well, and it feels like we're just opening ourselves up for another Republican government, right, in 2022. I mean,
I hear you, Nina. I mean, look, on Friday, I think it was Friday, it was the 49th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and most likely the last anniversary of Roe v. Wade, So
so it feels like everything you're advocating for makes a lot of sense to me, and unfortunately, it feels like that's not going to happen here in the United States. I mean, I don't know. Who did you support for president, I wonder? Do you talk about that?
I did not support anyone for president, Nina, because I didn't find anyone who was running, to be someone that represented me. But because the United States, because of the way that we vote in the United States, I mean, as an anarchist, I barely believe in elections anyway, because the very idea of the nation state is that kind of is like the originator of the kind of hierarchies that I'm trying to dismantle. However, the more pragmatic, practical side of me recognizes that in the United States, the way that we vote forces you to choose the lesser of the worst,
Of
so
the evils.
Constantly we choose the best of the worst, and that's why we need ranked choice voting, so that we can guarantee that people, the person who really should be in office should be in office. But then I look at New York City and I see how for the first time ranked choice voting gave us who? Eric Adams.
I know, I was just about to say to you, we did ranked choice voting in New York, and I don't know if it was really the best thing. I mean, time will tell, but
I know. So we went and chose an ex-cop at a time when we're talking about abolished cops. Oh my God.
Know. Were you a fan of Maya Wiley by any chance? I liked Maya.
I was a fan of Maya Wiley, and I was also a fan of Diana Morales,
Yes.
She was my favorite. I wanted Morales,
Actually, it's really funny you said that, because yesterday during our vision board workshop, one of the women here had a picture of Diana Morales on her vision board, which I thought was fascinating. Okay, so tell me, if you had to pick one American female politician who you most admire, who would that be?
Oh, let's see now. See, I mean, AOC, comes to mind. Cori Bush comes to mind. Ilhan Omar comes to mind. All of those politicians obviously belong in the squad, and the squad go as far left as they can without completely freaking Americans out, because even, they're not, fully in the socialist rank, but even that freaks so many Americans out. So if I could combine all of them into one and just push them as far. The thing that I most look for in a politician is, have they been hungry? Have they ever gone without a meal? And Cori Bush has. Have they ever been unhoused? Cori Bush has. She's talked in interviews about sleeping in her car with her 2 children. Have they ever been, a single parent? Someone like Katie Parker has. Have they ever been subjected to the various oppressions that I believe come from patriarchy? AOC and Ilhan Omar have, So when I look at politicians, I look at the US Congress and I see that so many of the people in it are millionaires, if not billionaires. So many of them have not gone one single day facing any kind of struggle that now in a pandemic should be center stage. And that's why it's so frustrating to follow American politics. So if I could, I'm just sitting here waiting for an anarchist politician that comes around and says, you know what, I want to burn all this down. Elect me so that I can destroy the electoral system.
Yeah, this may not be the country where that's going to get very far, but I admire your principles. What of all the kind of feminist agendas, what's most important to you right now? If you could fix one thing, what would it be?
It's really difficult to choose one thing because, you know, when I talk about patriarchy, Nina, I think of an octopus. I always tell people I want you to imagine an octopus, because I think when people talk about patriarchy, they often talk about men and just men, and it's not about men. And
Yeah.
that's if they even talk about patriarchy, because I often say too, when you bring patriarchy up, it's like asking a fish, what is water? You know, a fish is going to say, what is water? Because everything around the fish is water. It's like the air it
Yeah,
breathes.
it's the whole structure. It's the air we breathe. I mean, it's like systemic racism. There are tentacles. It's everywhere.
Exactly. So and that's why I talk about the octopus. And so the one thing that I want to destroy is that octopus, because I want people to imagine that the head of the octopus is patriarchy, and each one of the 8 tentacles is one of the oppressions that system patriarchy uses. So there's white supremacy, capitalism, misogyny, homophobia,
Yeah,
ageism, ableism, transphobia. And so when you ask me to choose one, it's really difficult
it's
because
impossible,
they
right?
work in unison, you know? And
Well, so
so
then I guess what that makes me think, because I think you're completely right, and in some ways it's a stupid question, then the question for me becomes, can we really address these larger issues, or can we only really do it in an individual way? Like, it strikes me that your polyamorous state, for example, or stance, is a really good way on a personal level to address patriarchy, right? It's allowing yourself more sexual freedom. It's turning things on their head. And that we can do these things in our private lives. But I guess I often feel, I think as a lot of us do, really overwhelmed in the large scale. Like, can I really change anything in the greater world? So I guess my question to you is, I mean, you're spending all your time 24/7 trying to address these issues. Come the end of your life, do you think you will have made any headway in any particular issue?
Well, you know, we often say, you know, when it comes around to Rosa Parks' birthday, for example,
Mhm.
we must remind everyone that it wasn't just this one incident in Rosa Parks'
Mm,
life when she refused to get out of her seat that changed everything, because Rosa Parks was an activist for decades before that.
mhm.
So I think it's really important to see that change, big systemic change, doesn't come overnight and doesn't come
Right.
from one
We
act
all have to be
that we
working
do.
on it over and over and over again.
Absolutely, and it
And you
comes
can
from many
dedicate
acts.
your life to that work.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what I often say is I tell people that I believe in feminism in 3D, and the 3D are actually 3Ds, and they are defy, disobey, and disrupt. So I often tell people every day, find a way to defy, disobey, and or disrupt the patriarchy. Because when you do that, it's like you're strengthening your feminist muscles. It's like when you start to weightlift, you begin with maybe 5 pounds, then you go up to 8 pounds, you go up to 12 pounds. When you do the 3Ds every day or as many times a day as you can, you strengthen your feminist muscles, because it doesn't come from suddenly, you know, deadlifting 200
Right.
pounds. It comes from,
Defy, disobey, disrupt. Okay, so I guess this leads us a little bit into rage, right? So give me some examples of how we can do that. And actually, someone in the audience just said, what are some ways we can encourage and organize young women 18 to 30 to do the 3Ds? Like, what are concrete actions? Like, again, I go back to the kind of like, I'm familiar with rage on a personal level. I've gotten much better. I no longer feel angry. I did when I was younger. And I've written about it. Now I'm more at peace, but I probably am also less activist. Like, not feeling angry every day feels like a better way to live. On the other hand, I want to disrupt the patriarchy also. I fully feel I'm completely a feminist. So give me some examples. What are things we can be doing?
well, you know, like simple things, that are seemingly simple things. If you hear or see someone being misogynist or homophobic, disrupt that. If
Mm-hmm.
you see someone who is actively harming someone, or, you know, those tentacles of the patriarchy,
Face
define it, disrupt it, disobey it, you know. But one of the things that I write about in the chapter on anger in the 7 necessary sins for women and girls is that all children are born with what I call the pilot light of rage. And that pilot light is like the pilot light in the oven that, you know, is simmering, and then you turn it on when you need to get, you know, when you're baking something or roasting something. But what we end up doing to girls is that we snuff out that pilot light and we keep it raging in boys, so that when boys grow up, when boys become men, anger is the only emotion available to them at the expense of all other emotions. And for
Mhm.
girls, they grow up to become women for whom anger is never, ever available to them. And they subsume it, and it becomes sadness, anxiety, self-harm, eating
Yeah,
disorder, all of that.
yeah.
So for parents, I would say a way to defy, disobey, and disrupt the patriarchy is to nurture that rage against injustice in girls and to allow it to continue. Because something called the Global Adolescent Research Study that I quote in my book again, found that around the world, not just in the East or the West, around the world, by the age of 10, girls had been taught and had accepted that they were weak and vulnerable. So we have to start very early. We have to start even earlier than 18 to 30. We have to see, you see a little girl, and when she's denied something that she believes is hers, she's going to be angry. But you see
Yep.
parents often say, oh, be nice. Nice girls don't
Absolutely.
do that, So let's
Yep.
start much, much earlier than 18 and allow
Allowing us to express our rage. There's there are a number of great books on this subject, but I loved Soraya Chemali's
Shamali.
book,
Yeah,
Rage Becomes Her, is
yeah,
really good on this
yeah,
subject.
yeah.
I completely agree with you. So allowing women and really encouraging calling out, basically calling out, calling in. Actually, what do you think of that distinction between calling out and calling in? Have you studied the work of Loretta, what's her name, at Smith? There's an academic who does a lot of work, a Black woman, on this idea of, because it sounds like you're more of the calling out school of thought, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've called out and I've been called out, so it's interesting that I mean, one of the reasons that I love Black feminists, and I quote Black feminists as much as I can, is that octopus, the patriarchy octopus, when we see who is most strangled by those tentacles, you will find that Black women, and especially if you're talking about a trans Black woman or a queer Black woman or a disabled Black woman, and that's why the Combahee River Collective, this collective of queer socialist Black women in the 1970s.
What's it called? I don't know it.
The Combahee River Collective. And I write about them in 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. And what they did was they came about at a time when the Black Power movement was fighting against white supremacy, but it was ridden with misogyny. And you had second wave feminism, which was fighting against misogyny, but it was ridden with racism. And so the Combahee River Collective came along and said, you know what, we're fighting misogyny and we're fighting racism. We're also fighting capitalism. And they said, when Black women are free, we will all be free.
Mm-hmm.
So all the work of Black feminists right now is especially vital. So when I follow, I don't know the particular academic that you mentioned, but I do know Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent, I think she wrote Emergent Strategy, and she's written Pleasure Activism. She's a fantastic activist. And she often talks about calling in and calling out. And I appreciate the distinction, because I think that especially with comrades and allies, the calling in is a more loving and compassionate way of doing it. With people who are not my allies and people who do not mean me well, I will call out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're working, I mean, it is a little bit the distinction also that goes back to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It's kind of the difference between rage and violence and, nonviolence. And it's an age-old debate. But I do think there's a place for rage. I agree with you, and particularly for women in rage, because we're not, and it's so true that women suppress it. And I often felt, I struggled personally in my 20s and 30s when my mom died young, and I had a father I was really angry at. And I acted out in so many ways on a personal level. I had a lot of fear, but it was really just submerged anger that I had to kind of get at. And, anger and fear are very closely aligned. So anyway, I really appreciate it. Oh, good. Someone just put into the chat the Combahee River Collective statement. Thank you, Deborah. That's awesome. And she says 7 Necessary Sins is a brilliant manifesto. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much.
Do you have time in all your work to do things like read fiction and stream things on TV? What do you love? What's your personal life like?
Absolutely. So I before the pandemic, I had this challenge to myself to read a book every week, and I kept it. The pandemic has wrecked my reading, of course, but I'm trying. I think it's wrecked our attention generally.
Our attention span, yeah, for sure.
Right? So I'm trying. And so what I do with my reading is I specifically seek out Black and women of color authors. I specifically seek out queer authors, and I specifically seek out fiction in translation. And I also love poetry. So between all of those, I try to find titles that, are kind of like the Venn diagram of all of that. So I just finished a book called what was it called? Oh God, I think it's called Dora Dies by Dreaming. It's on my shelf somewhere. I think it's called Dora Dies Dreaming, something like that.
Oh, Olga Dies Dreaming.
Olga, that's it. Oh, not Dora.
Yes, this was our book in this week's newsletter, and it just hit the bestseller list, actually.
Yeah. I just finished it. Thank you for reminding me. This is my perimenopausal moment where I just forget things.
Totally understand. No, I have actually not dug into this yet, but one of the members of our community asked us to make it a book club pick, so it's going to be our July book club pick.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
excellent.
I'm excited about this too. And you know what I'm also excited about? Have you read Bernadine Evaristo?
Yes, I have.
Her new book. She has I've read her, what's it called? Girls something or other, but
A Woman Interrupted, something like that, right?
Her new book looks really good. It's a
manifesto, yeah?
I also only read women. I do read white. I read all sorts of women, but I only read books by women. I'm just not interested in books by men in general.
I know, right? Enough already, right?
Yes. And do you have children? Did you decide not to have children? What's your stance there?
I am child-free by choice, and I'm actually writing, so I'm working on several book projects right now. One of my book projects is writing a book called Unmothering. I wrote an essay called Unmothering. It's one of my most popular essays on Feminist Giant newsletter, and it's about why I'm child-free by choice, and I'm adapting that into a book. And I'm also writing a book called Bloody Hell and Other Stories, adventures on menopause from across the personal and political spectrum. And that's going to be an anthology, a menopause anthology, in which the contributors are global and gender expansive. So those are book projects that I'm working on through which I address being child-free by choice. And I mentioned menopause specifically because, I mean, finally, this thing about being pregnant is almost behind me. I'm not fully menopausal yet. I'm still perimenopause.
Oh, I'm fully menopausal, and it's awesome, I can tell you.
Congratulations. I'm counting the weeks and months, Nina. Oh my God.
And it's one of those things you don't really believe till it happens, because that perimenopausal period kind of sucks. I mean, you look like you're handling it beautifully, but I was pretty miserable for a few years. And now I haven't had a period in almost 4 years, and I feel great. Like,
I'm so happy for you. It's fucking miserable. Oh my God.
It sucks. It sucks.
So, you know, I channel all of that into Feminist Giant, you know, my newsletter. So the unmothering, being child-free by choice, I never wanted children. I write about abortion because I had 2 abortions, one illegal in Egypt and one legal in the United States. So all of that, you know.
Was the illegal one scary? I've had 2 also.
Well, so the illegal one, and this is a reminder of how when you criminalize abortion, it hurts the poorest and the most vulnerable. I had money when I had my illegal abortion. So I was able to go to a doctor in Egypt who provided abortion care for money, you know, in return for money. Nonetheless, I honestly thought I was going to die, Nina. I was just so overwhelmed. I thought I was going to die, and I survived. But so many women do die. And I just
how old were you?
At the time, I was 29. I wasn't that young. I was 29.
Yeah. Is abortion legal in Egypt? I don't even know.
No. Only if the mother's life is in danger, and I think in some instances of rape. But so many women try to self-abort because you know, they're poor or they have no access to it, and they end up in the emergency room if they're lucky, where they will they're hemorrhaging and they will get a D&C, you know. And a woman died in Poland yesterday. I was writing about her on Twitter before I came on to speak with you. A woman who was pregnant with twins. One of the fetuses died, and they wouldn't give her an abortion because of Poland's ban on abortion. And they waited for the other fetus to die, and she died too. So that's
horrible. Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus.
and this is what we have to remember. So, I was talking about writing about abortion because so perimenopause is fucking hell, but perimenopause has also given me this shamelessness, this ability to talk about things I was never able to talk about before. So I write about my abortions, being child-free by choice, everything. I'm like, you know what, fuck this shit. I'm saying.
Yeah, and it gets even better. So I'm curious, your childless by choice stance, is it more political or more personal?
Well, I use child-free by choice. So I just like, you know, at a very, very early age, I recognized that I did not want to become a mother. I also didn't think I wanted to ever to be married, but I made the mistake of marrying for 2 years and got out, and it's never going to happen again.
You're here. I relate.
That's it. but I just never had that urge to be a mother. I recognize, you know, that there are people who do want to parent. I have never had that desire in me. And so I'm proudly child-free by choice. And, you know, in the US, this is another thing that in the US is being studied more and more, like polyamory, like we were saying, because some research came out quite recently that 1 in 4 people surveyed in the US say they are child-free by choice. And this was the first time ever that child-free by choice was distinguished from being childless under any circumstance.
Yeah.
So this isn't because we couldn't have children.
Of course not. No, you're absolutely right. Child-free by choice, and sorry I screwed up the language, is an absolutely great way to put it. And no, I admire it. I think it's great, and I think it should be highlighted more because there is so much ridiculous shame around it. And women who don't have kids are constantly asked. I mean, I wanted to ask you because I'm curious about your legacy. And I was also kind of curious. I knew, I did know, I asked the question for the audience, but I knew you didn't have children, but I was curious how much of a political statement it is, you know, the world is so fucked up. Like, I do feel like I have 4 children and at least 1 or 2 of them are pretty sure they don't want to have kids because the world is so fucked up. So I was interested if it was more kind of an inner thing, like you didn't feel a need to mother anyone, or if it was because, you know.
It's much more a personal thing, but I also think, you know, in my essay for Feminist Giant, Unmothering, you know, I begin by saying that my paternal grandmother had 8 children and my maternal grandmother was pregnant 14 times, 11 of the pregnancies came to term. And then, so the oldest of those 11 pregnancies is my own mother. And so her mother had 11 children. My mother has 3 children, and I'm the eldest child of my mother, and I have chosen to have none. So when I look at, you know, the legacy that my ancestors, as we say, you know, when I look at my paternal and maternal grandmother, 8 children, 11 children. And I try to imagine my maternal grandmother's life. She was basically pregnant almost every 2 years, every year and a half.
Horrible.
And like, wow, you know, I mean, so I think a part of that went into my decision to not have children, you know. I'm like, I mean, bless my grandmother, may she be at rest and in peace and power wherever she is right now. But, you know, we are more than walking incubators for patriarchy. You know?
I completely agree. And I have to say, I think I wanted children really young because my mom had died and I wanted some sense of family, and I love my children, obviously, but had I known how much stress and work and expense and endlessness it would be, you know, I might've done it a little differently. It's a lot. Children are a lot. It's a big responsibility.
It really is. And here in the United States, you're talking about, you know, I think the only industrialized country in the world. First of all, the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world, but the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't give paid maternity leave. And then you have these anti-abortion fucks, and I'm deliberately profane about them, who say, oh, you know what? It's so much easier to have a child now. You don't have to choose between work and children. Have children. So that they're advocating forced births. They're treating us like we're walking incubators for them. And they have the fucking nerve to say it's so easy because, you know, they come from a life of privilege. And you're talking about working class women, Black and women of color who are barely holding on during this pandemic. And
no, it's just sickening when I think
Amy
about women.
Barrett.
I know, when I think about women in those states like Texas, or I mean, it's just fucking,
it's Mississippi very soon.
Mississippi. No, and it's also just a relentlessly thankless job being a mother. So mothers get blamed for everything. So I don't know. I hear you. This has been so fascinating. I just think you're amazing. I can't wait to meet you in person.
Thank you.
Someone in the audience says this is outstanding. Thank you. Just added my support on Patreon for Mona's work. So that's lovely, Alice. Thank you. We will. Oh, my last question is, what does that amazing artwork behind your head say?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So this is an Egyptian feminist activist called Alia al-Mahdi, and on her bare chest is written, "There will be millions of us." And I write about her in Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, because about 2 or 3 weeks before I was assaulted in Cairo, she posted a nude picture of herself from her family home, not on the street, but from her family home, a nude picture of herself just to speak out against sexual hypocrisy in Egypt. This was during the year of our revolution. There was so much outrage against Hanina, and a lawyer who was pro-regime raised a case to strip her of her citizenship, to punish her for stripping. She had to leave Egypt, and she now lives in she's a political asylee in Sweden. So she basically had to go into exile because she posted a picture of herself naked on her blog. You know?
That's insane. Can you spell her name? Because I want to look up her work.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what she does online right now, but it's Aliaa, Aliat, and then her family name is El-Mahdy.
Okay, great. I
And I
love that. It's beautiful.
and so, you know, this is by an artist friend of mine called Nadine Faraj, who had an exhibit in New York where this painting was, and others, of basically portraying nude and semi-nude protests from around the world. Because in many parts of the world, the nude protest is the most powerful form of protesting. There are many countries on the continent of Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, you know, she's Egyptian, where appearing semi-nude or topless or naked is the highest form of protest, because what do we own besides our body, you know? So
Yeah.
Nadine had an exhibit called Naked Revolt that was basically honoring people who use their bodies, naked bodies, as a form of political protest.
Wow, I'm going to look all that up. That's fabulous. All right, you have been the treat of my week. I absolutely love this.
Thank you, Nina.
Just thank you a ton. We'll continue to follow and support and read your work and spread the word. And
Thank you.
I hope I get to meet you in person one day soon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate speaking with you. And if I may, I would encourage anyone who is perimenopausal to please look up Bloody Hell and support that book, because we're crowdfunding for the book. So if they can, if they have funds, if they could support Bloody Hell, there's information about it on my Twitter and on my Feminist Giant. And please support Feminist Giant, my newsletter.
Absolutely. Everyone go subscribe to Feminist Giant and look up Mona's work.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again. All right.
Thank you,
Take
Nina.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.